The White House called him the most active terrorist on the planet. He was born in Nigeria, raised there, and for years, he operated there, hiding in plain sight across one of the most volatile regions in Africa. Last night, he ran out of places to hide. American and Nigerian forces struck his compound, and by the time it was over, Abu-Bilal al-Minuki, ISIS's reported second-in-command globally, was dead. But here's what nobody is talking about yet. It was late Friday night, Eastern Time, when President Donald Trump took to Truth Social with a message that stopped intelligence analysts mid-sentence. "Tonight, at my direction," Trump wrote, "brave American forces and the armed forces of Nigeria flawlessly executed a meticulously planned and very complex mission to eliminate the most active terrorist in the world from the battlefield." The target? Abu-Bilal al-Minuki. According to Trump, ISIS's number 2 globally. The location of the strike, not disclosed. Trump's post said only that al-Minuki thought he could hide in Africa. Nigeria's State House, the office of the Nigerian president, confirmed the operation independently, stating that forces struck his compound in the Lake Chad Basin and that several of his lieutenants were also killed. 2 governments, 1 joint operation, 1 target. But this story has layers that the headline doesn't capture. And if you want fact-based, clear-eyed coverage of a story that is still developing by the hour, subscribe now, because we are just getting started. Let's establish exactly what we know and what we don't. According to President Trump's post on Truth Social, the operation was carried out on Friday, May 16th. It was described as meticulously planned and very complex. Trump credited both American forces and the armed forces of Nigeria, calling the execution flawless. The Nigerian State House released its own independent confirmation, a significant detail. This was not simply the US announcing a strike that Nigeria found out about later. Both governments were involved, both governments confirmed, and both governments are claiming credit. That joint ownership matters. It signals a level of operational coordination between Washington and Abuja that goes deeper than a routine intelligence sharing arrangement. Now, who was Abu-Bilal al-Minuki? According to US Treasury Department documents from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, documents that predate this operation, al-Minuki was born in 1982 in Borno State in northeastern Nigeria. Borno borders Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. It is, by any geopolitical measure, one of the most unstable corners of West Africa. It is the same region where Boko Haram was born, where ISIS West Africa, sometimes called ISWAP, has waged an insurgency for years. Al-Minuki was, according to those OFAC documents, a sanctioned individual. He was already on a US government list. His existence was known. His location was the question. Trump said his government had sources who tracked al-Minuki's movements. He was also known by another name, Abu-Mainok, according to Nigerian authorities. Beyond Trump's statement and the Nigerian State House confirmation, there is no independent verification of his death as of this report. That matters, because in counterterrorism operations, confirmation of a high-value target's elimination can take time, and sometimes what is announced as confirmed turns out to be incomplete. What the Nigerian government did confirm: several of his lieutenants were also killed in the strike on his compound. This is not a single target elimination. It was described as a broader strike, and there's a timeline underneath this that most reporting is not capturing. This is not the first time Trump has ordered military action in Nigeria. In December 2025, just 5 months ago, Trump announced a strike against ISIS militants in northwestern Nigeria. He described that operation as targeting individuals he said had been killing Christians. That strike, too, caused friction. The Nigerian government pushed back at the time, rejecting claims that it was failing to protect its Christian population and expressing bewilderment at the suggestion of a US military intervention on Nigerian soil. Now, 5 months later, a second and significantly larger operation, this time with full Nigerian government cooperation. What changed? And what does that shift tell us about where the US-Nigeria security relationship is actually heading? That's the question that the next hour of diplomacy is going to struggle to answer cleanly. He was born in Borno, sanctioned by the US Treasury, hunted for years, and the government of his own country helped take him out. That is not a normal counterterrorism story. To understand why this strike carries weight far beyond a single operation, you need to understand the geography. The Lake Chad Basin. Look at a map. Lake Chad sits at the intersection of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. It is a region that has been systematically destabilized over the past 15 years by a constellation of militant groups: Boko Haram, its splinter factions, and ISIS West Africa. These groups have fed off poverty, ethnic grievance, climate stress, as the lake itself has shrunk dramatically, and a security vacuum left by governments that simply cannot cover that much ungoverned territory. ISIS West Africa, the affiliate al-Minuki allegedly commanded at a senior level, has been one of the deadliest non-state armed groups in the world by casualty count in recent years. Its reach extends across borders that exist on paper more than they do on the ground. Now, the US government's claim is that its number 2 is dead. If confirmed, truly confirmed, that is operationally significant. Senior ISIS commanders carry institutional knowledge, recruitment networks, financing channels, communication methods, safe house locations, relationships with local power brokers. Losing a number 2 does not dissolve an organization, but it disrupts it. It forces a succession process. And succession processes create internal competition, miscommunication, and exposure. The question analysts are already asking, and which no government statement yet answers, is who was al-Minuki's designated successor? And is that person already in position? Now zoom out further. Trump's framing of this operation is worth examining carefully. He linked al-Minuki's death directly to the protection of Christians in Africa, stating that al-Minuki will no longer terrorize the people of Africa or help plan operations to target Americans. That framing connects a counterterrorism operation in West Africa to a domestic American political narrative, one Trump has consistently used since late 2025, when he publicly accused ISIS-affiliated groups of conducting a mass slaughter of Christians in Nigeria. Nigerian analysts and independent observers have consistently described the security situation there as more complex than that framing allows. Communal violence in Nigeria involves multiple ethnic and religious communities. Farmers and herders clash over land and water. Ethnic tensions predate the current insurgency by generations. Both Christians and Muslims have been victims of extremist violence. The Nigerian government, for its part, welcomed this operation. President Bola Tinubu released a statement thanking Trump personally, calling this a reflection of shared security objectives. That is a significant diplomatic pivot from the friction of late 2025. Do you think this kind of joint US-African counterterrorism operation becomes more common under Trump, or does it risk creating new complications on the ground? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you're seeing. Here is the implication that has not been fully reported yet. This joint operation required Nigerian intelligence to assist in tracking al-Minuki. That means Nigerian forces had some level of operational awareness of where one of the world's most wanted men was moving, inside their own territory. That raises a question worth sitting with. How long did both governments know, and what determined the timing of Friday's strike? There is a detail buried in the geography that deserves more attention than it's getting. Abu-Bilal al-Minuki was born in Borno State. He grew up inside the same northeastern Nigerian region that produced the insurgency he went on to lead at a global level. He was not a foreign fighter imported into Africa. He was, in the eyes of the US Treasury and the US government, a homegrown commander who rose through local militant networks to eventually become, by Washington's account, the second most powerful figure in ISIS worldwide. That trajectory, from Borno State to global ISIS number 2, is not a recruitment story. It is an institutional story. It tells you something about how deep these networks go, how long they have been developing, and how little the surface-level security operations of the past decade actually disrupted the underlying infrastructure. Eliminating al-Minuki removes a person. It does not remove the system that produced him. Set aside the press releases and the Truth Social posts for a moment. Think about what this region actually looks like. Borno State, northeastern Nigeria, one of the poorest states in one of the most economically unequal countries in Africa, a region that has lived under the shadow of insurgency since at least 2009, when Boko Haram's violent phase began. Maiduguri, the state capital, has been surrounded, besieged, and fought over. Entire communities displaced. Farming collapsed in areas where it was the only economic activity. schools closed, children who grew up knowing nothing other than the sounds of conflict. Nigeria is home to approximately 237.5 million people, according to UN estimates, the largest population on the African continent. It is a country of enormous diversity, over 250 ethnic groups, 2 major religions, a federal structure that tries, and often struggles, to hold together competing regional interests. For ordinary Nigerians in the northeast, in Borno, in Yobe, in Adamawa, news of a major ISIS commander being killed does not land the way it might in a Washington briefing room. These are communities where every headline about a strike or an elimination is followed by the same question. Will it be quieter tonight? Will the checkpoints feel different tomorrow? Will the farmers be safer when they go to their fields next week? The answer is almost never an immediate yes. Insurgencies do not announce when they are weakened. They often become harder to read after a leadership strike. Less predictable, not more. Local communities sometimes experience a period of relative calm. Other times, a retaliation follows. And in areas where the state's presence is already thin, where there are not enough soldiers, not enough police, not enough services, the population absorbs whatever comes next with very little buffer. There is also the broader Nigerian context to hold in mind. Nigeria's security challenges do not begin and end with ISIS or ISWAP. In the northwest, bandits operate vast criminal networks that have displaced hundreds of thousands. In the south, separatist tensions simmer. In the Middle Belt, farmer-herder clashes over shrinking water and land resources claim lives with a regularity that rarely reaches international headlines. For Nigerians living through this, particularly those in Borno, where al-Minuki was born, where this insurgency has its deepest roots, the news of this operation lands inside a much longer story. A story that predates this operation by 15 years. A story that will not end with a single strike, regardless of who is removed from the battlefield. And then there is the diplomatic dimension that affects ordinary people too. When Trump first began publicly discussing potential military intervention in Nigeria in late 2025, citing Christian persecution, many Nigerians reacted with alarm. The suggestion of uninvited foreign military action on Nigerian soil was deeply sensitive. Nigeria has its own military, its own sovereignty, its own complex internal politics around how security is discussed, who gets protected, and who gets overlooked. The fact that Friday's operation was framed as a joint mission, that Nigerian forces participated, that the Nigerian government confirmed and praised the operation, changes the political texture of this event considerably. But it does not erase the underlying anxieties. Who decides when and where American forces act in Nigeria? On what legal framework? Under what oversight? Those questions have not been answered publicly. For communities near Lake Chad, communities that may have been close to the compound that was struck, Friday night may have meant something very different from a press release. Distant sounds, uncertainty about what happened, waiting for information that may not come quickly, in areas where communications infrastructure is already fragile. ISIS has been here before. Senior commanders eliminated, successors installed, operations disrupted, and then rebuilt. Al-Zarqawi, al-Baghdadi, hundreds of mid-level and senior figures removed over 2 decades of counterterrorism operations across multiple continents. The organization has shown a consistent and documented ability to reconstitute, so the strategic question is not simply whether this strike was executed successfully. The question is, what happens inside ISIS West Africa in the weeks that follow? Who steps into the vacuum? And does the removal of a figure this senior accelerate a fracture within the network or consolidate it? There is also the question of retaliation, not a guarantee, but a possibility that security analysts and governments in the Lake Chad Basin region are almost certainly already factoring into their assessments right now. Step back even further. This operation, confirmed jointly by the United States and Nigeria on May 16, 2026, is one moment in a much longer strategic competition playing out across the African continent. For years, West and Central Africa have been contested ground, not in the Cold War sense, but in a subtler, more persistent sense. The Sahel has watched French military forces withdraw from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, following coups that installed governments hostile to Western military presence. Russia's Wagner Group, now rebranded and restructured under the name Africa Corps, has expanded its footprint, providing security services to governments that have distanced themselves from Western partners. China's economic influence continues to deepen through infrastructure investment, trade relationships, and diplomatic engagement. Against that backdrop, a joint US-Nigerian counterterrorism operation of this scale carries symbolic weight beyond its immediate military outcome. It signals that the US-Nigeria security partnership remains active and capable. It demonstrates a willingness, on Nigeria's part, to coordinate directly with American forces on high-value target operations inside Nigerian territory. That is not a small diplomatic gesture. For Washington, this is also the second such publicized strike in Nigeria within 6 months. The December 2025 operation was announced unilaterally by Trump, with Nigerian governmental tension following. This time, the Nigerian government was a partner, announced the operation on its own terms, praised the result, and framed it as aligned with its own security objectives. That is a meaningful evolution in how this relationship is being managed publicly. But here's what the victory announcement does not resolve. ISIS West Africa, ISWAP, has roots that go back well over a decade. It commands territory. It maintains relationships with local communities, sometimes through coercion, sometimes through provision of basic services that the state does not deliver. Killing a senior commander disrupts a network. It does not dismantle the conditions that sustain it. Nigeria still faces the underlying drivers that allowed this insurgency to grow. Poverty concentrated in the northeast, governance gaps, climate-driven resource competition, and an ethnic and religious landscape that outside actors, including ISIS, have learned to exploit. Those factors are not addressed by a strike on a compound in the Lake Chad Basin. They require something slower, harder, and more expensive than a single military operation. Trump's statement that ISIS's global operations are greatly diminished by this strike is a claim. It is not yet an assessment. Analysts will spend weeks evaluating what al-Minuki's removal actually costs the organization in practical terms, what intelligence he held, what relationships he maintained, what operational capacity he directly controlled. What we know right now is this. A man the US government considered one of the most dangerous figures on the planet was killed on Friday in a coordinated international operation. 2 governments are claiming it as a success. The region around Lake Chad, one of the most vulnerable and contested landscapes on Earth, woke up Saturday to a new reality. Whether that reality is more stable or simply different is a question that cannot be answered tonight. The Lake Chad Basin does not give up its answers quickly, and neither does ISIS. This story is still unfolding. No independent confirmation of al-Minuki's death has been issued outside of government statements. The exact location of the strike has not been made public, and the question of what comes next for ISIS West Africa, who leads it now, how it responds, that is a story that may define the next phase of the conflict in this region. What do you think? Does removing a number 2 genuinely set back an organization like ISIS, or does it simply accelerate succession? Drop your analysis in the comments. And if you want to follow this story as new details emerge, subscribe now, because the next development in this one could come at any hour.